remains front of mind for Kiwi businesses as global tensions continue to disrupt energy markets. In this follow-up sector update, Liza Cox-Hancy, CEO of Kora, she joins Retail NZ to unpack what the ongoing Iran, US and Israel conflict means for the fuel supply, pricing and planning here in Aotearoa, and what the businesses should be thinking about next. Kia ora, I'm Carolyn Young, Chief Executive of Retail NZ, and today I'm joined by Liza Cox-Hancy, who's the Chief Executive Officer with Kora. Kia ora, Liza, welcome.
Kia ora, it's lovely to be here as well.
Look, there is a lot happening right now. Can you just give us like a synopsis of what you've seen happening over the last sort of 4 weeks with fuel prices?
Yeah, for sure. What we have seen is obviously there's been a bit of a steady increase and it hasn't really stopped. So New Zealand is using sort of Asia Pacific fuel refining. And so whenever they're looking at pricing, they're looking at the price of the barrels of oil up in Singapore. And the cost has been obviously on a bit of an exponential hockey stick of going up. And I think what we haven't been used to seeing is diesel accelerating its price and outstripping the increase on what petrol has been. So to date, there's been about a 90-cent increase in diesel. And over the past 4 weeks, it's been about a 55-cent increase on petrol.
So can you unpack for our viewers why is there that differential this time around with this crisis in terms of diesel increasing at almost twice the rate of fuel?
Yeah, we've been speaking to the fuel companies about that too, because obviously it's not something to what we're used to seeing. It's all about demand. 80% on average of New Zealand's fueling use is diesel. And a lot of the crude oil product that comes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is obviously the area of tension at the moment, is normally the product that is being used to create the diesel refined end user product that we get. Our product is slightly different in its specification as well to Australia, which has been in the news lately too. Basically, there's a sulfur content in diesel and everybody tries to keep that as low as they can to make it cleaner burning, etc. The additional cost is that the demand for diesel is higher and the supplies for diesel are under greater strain.
And of course, most of us are sitting, if we're thinking with our consumer hat on, we know that most people have a car that's fueled by 91 or 95, or it might be a PHEV or
Yes.
a hybrid or an electric car. But actually, 93% of freight is driven by trucks that go on diesel, and there's a lot of
Yes.
freight moving across Aotearoa all the time. We live around the edges of two big long islands and a small island at the bottom. So does mean that we use a lot of diesel in terms of distribution of goods around the country.
Yes.
But if we think about it from a supply chain perspective, where does New Zealand stand in that?
Yeah, so I think the good thing for New Zealand is we have 5 fuel suppliers in New Zealand that gather their fuel from overseas. And the way that the New Zealand market works is all of the different fuel retailers have a supply contract with various fuel suppliers to ensure that they have a quota available to them based on what they think they're going to sell from one or many fuel suppliers. And a comment that came out the other day was New Zealand stands very well in the region because of the fact that they have contracted supply. So they are being prioritised because they have contracted supply out of Singapore and out of South Korea. Whereas in other markets, and I use Australia as an example, it's a bit more of a sort of a free market philosophy over there. You don't have to have a supply contract. You can go to the terminal, rock up and say, yo, can I have 10,000 litres of fuel? And they'll say, sure, that's $1.20 a litre.
Yeah.
And you pay a spot price on the day. Now, the spot pricing is not being prioritised over those that have contracted commitments.
And look, I think the interesting thing there for our viewers really is that just remember, focus on the information that's coming out of New Zealand about our supplies, because it's different than what's happening in Australia. So
Yes.
really making sure that we kind of get that space. And look, just before we came onto the podcast, we talked a little bit about globally what's being done with the fuel supply to shore up supplies to countries around the world. Do you want to touch a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, I can. We work very closely with our partners, and one of them is obviously ExxonMobil, which is the Mobil Oil Group. And what they when we were talking to them recently, they mentioned that there is crude oil product coming out of Colombia, out of West Africa, and also out of the UAE in places that are not currently being impacted by some of the war activity
Mm.
and being brought down to the South Korea refinery because the refineries themselves can continue to operate, but if they haven't got any product to refine, then there's nothing they can do. And that's their challenge is actually getting their hands on the product. And so those markets are being opened up. And also the ExxonMobil team in the US are looking at taking refined product into Australia to relieve tension in the Asia Pac region to free it up for everybody else. So they are thinking a little bit differently to how they ordinarily would sort of be covering that demand.
Yeah, which is great. And look,
Yeah.
I think, yesterday we were both on a call with MB, which is the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Enterprise, and they are leading the piece of work within New Zealand around our response and what they're needing to do. And so we thought we'd just give you a little bit of a broad update in terms of what was talked about. And one of the things that, Liza, we talked about was interesting. There's a broad range of other ministries that are interconnected into this work, and it's not being led solely by one ministry.
No, that's right. I think, well, it was interesting hearing all of the different ministers' names that they rattled off because it's pretty much every minister that holds a high profile portfolio, right? And I think there was maybe 10 or 11 ministries involved in daily briefings and stand-ups to talk about what has happened overnight and where are we at today. And I thought it was really interesting as well that they were talking a lot about international relations and how Foreign Affairs is doing a lot of work to make sure that New Zealand is being included in international conversations and that the partnerships that they have are being sort of massaged as much as they possibly can to keep us in the loop and front and centre.
Yeah, that sort of role of diplomacy comes to the
Yeah.
fore at these times, and you have to have a couple of approaches and have a diplomacy pathway that you're looking at, but also have a strategy internally around how you're going to address things. So I think it was really useful from that perspective, and I think still early days, and if this ends up being a long conflict, there's a lot yet to unpack. And I think each week we're going to see more news come out from government, and there'll be more for us to sort of work our way through and understand what is the impact. One of the things that we do know is that we are reaching out to government. We've got calls in with the Minister of Finance. We've got calls in with the MB to sit down and discuss with them the importance of a couple of things, really. Firstly, one is making sure people remain working in the office, because working from home from a retail perspective is obviously going to be challenging for people. And we know that fuel overlays almost everything that anyone does. Transport, adds on to every cost of every product. So just what impact that's going to have on the cost of living crisis that we've almost got through the back of. So have reached out to the Reserve Bank as well to get a bit more of an understanding from there and what their strategy is around that space. So it is a time of uncertainty, and we do know that it can be challenging for retailers as it is for consumers just to navigate these waters right now. Anything else at your end, Liza?
I was just trying to think if there was really anything else. I mean, that MB presentation also touched on the fact that when they compared this to the 70s, which was the only other time kind of
Yeah.
in recent history that we've had an oil shock, I suppose you would call it, this as an event is far more significant. And it's probably very indicative of the world that we live in today, right? Like we're used to being mobile and global. And look, we are in a good state that we have got fuel supply and we are well positioned for fuel supply, and there is no need to panic, which I think is the other important message that they keep trying to promote, which is, putting your wheelie bin on the back of your ute and filling it with fuel is not a good idea, which is some of the things that we've been seeing. But yeah, it's not to panic, but it is also to perhaps be a little bit mindful about when you're going away for the weekend and you're taking two cars, maybe you only need to take one.
Yeah, and I think, if collectively if we can work together and
Yeah,
make sure that everybody is being responsible in terms of how they're approaching their use of fuel,
yeah.
then it will help us through whatever phases that we've got coming ahead of us. Look, we've all got our fingers crossed that this will be short term rather than long term, but I think we have to have an eye on both aspects. We have to think about, what a short term strategy would be, but also if it's going to be longer, we have to think about how that would play out. So I think,
Yeah.
Don't want to be alarmist to anyone, but really just remembering that there's a lot that's uncertain, and we'll keep you up to speed as much as we can as things unfold.
I think we also got confidence that there was a lot of work being done in the background at that government level. I don't think the everyday New Zealander necessarily sees what actually goes on when something like this happens. And I was pretty encouraged to see the depth of work that's being done to make sure that we have a plan, because they're certainly not just sitting there going, oh, well, I'll wave my finger in the air and see what happens. That is not the case at all.
Yeah,
There's a lot
absolutely.
of people doing some serious paddling at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we will be keeping you up to date, but for today, thank you so much for joining us, Liza. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you
Pleasure.
and hear about your knowledge through Kora and your relationships with Waitomo and Mobile, and the hard work that you're doing to ensure that there's great supply for our members in the New Zealand community.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you as well.
All right, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to visit www.kora.co.nz to find out more. This was part of our Empowering Retail series, your go-to resource for short, actionable insights to take your business to the next level. Watch out for more series to come. Don't forget to subscribe, but until next time, ka kite anō. Bye for now.